You're listening to Online Pet Health Podcasts with Dr. Megan Kelly. Continuing education for veterinarian rehabilitation therapists. Learn more at onlinepethealth.com.
Hey Vet Rehabbers, today we revisit one of our Facebook Lives with Online Pet Health team member Anae Lloyd and her guest Donna Wills. They chat about rehabilitation in alternative species of animals. They explain how we can apply what we know to the species we don't know and how we can gain confidence in dealing with the unknown while keeping safety at the forefront of our mind. For those of you that are interested in exotics, we have some training in our Online Pet Health members library. We have an extensive library of over 100 hours of webinars in our small animal platform and over 50 hours in our hydro platform, as well as 50 hours in our equine platform. For more information, you can go and check out onlinepethealth.com. We have a whole list of all the learning in our library. But for those wanting more information on exotics, we have two in mind. The one is in the small animal platform, keeping your exotics pain-free, and the other one in the hydro platform, which is using hydrotherapy in exotics. If you want to learn more about Donna Wills, you can go to www.animalphysiotherapy.org.uk, as well as find out more about her course, which we chat about in the Facebook Live. She has a course in Udemy, which is looking at treating unfamiliar species, and we'll put the URLs for both of these, her website as well as the Udemy course, in the description. Over to Donna and Anae.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Donna. Thank you so much for joining us.
You are welcome. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Donna, will you tell us a bit about yourself and how you started working with other species?
So my history is that it's quite vast, actually. I actually grew up with my uncle as a farmer. So I grew up dealing with sheep and pigs and all sorts of things, chickens. He had all sorts of things on his farm. And I was fairly destined to end up working with animals. That was always going to be inevitable. I went off to agricultural college, where my knowledge of different species grew hugely. We worked with alpaca and the tiny smally ferrets and meerkats, and then some bigger farm animals, rheas, all sorts of things. We had so many things. So I loved my time at college. And then I decided that veterinary was the world for me. So I became a veterinary nurse. And then my knowledge of rabbits and cats obviously exploded, along with your dogs and other smallies. Country bumpkin veterinary practice as well meant that we did deal with other species a lot, particularly rabbits and ferrets, all those sorts of things. We even had stray ferrets come in, which was weird. And then obviously with physio, I then moved on, became an animal physio, and my work predominantly it started off with horses and dogs, but then I ended up gravitating more towards dogs. But then that world still revolved around the cats and the rabbits. So I was treating lots of cats and rabbits as they came up. And over the years, they've become more common species. So they're treated more and more. But then there's also been times where I've been called on for my skills for other animals as well, like skunk or macaw, alpaca. So there's no limitation to what animals you can treat, and that's what I really like about physio. It's just about having to think directly more at that species, which I love.
Donna, since running your course, what is kind of the most common question that you get asked about treating other species?
Well, interestingly, I wouldn't say there is a common question, because actually most people, still, even with dogs and horses, they say, what, you can do physio on an animal? And we haven't got past that. So question about other species, there just isn't any, because they just assume that it can't be done, which is bonkers. So actually, most of the time, the conversation comes from me saying that, yes, we can treat cats. Yes, we can treat rabbits. Yes, we can treat everything else. If it's got muscles and bones, give us a go. And there's so much we can do. So actually, there definitely isn't a common question, more a wow statement when I point out that it can be done.
That's incredible. And from other professionals, Donna, what questions do you get from people that do your course, that start with your course?
So from a course point of view, actually, I would say that most people are more like, oh, good. and they actually feel more relief about having one. So actually, again, people don't really question it, but throughout the course, there are questions that I raise so that people can start exploring their thoughts about various species and stuff. And actually, I think we're at the stage where it's kind of opening your mind. So actually, people don't necessarily think of a question, but when you say something, again, it's like, whoa, oh, okay, I didn't think of that. So actually, I think at the moment, it's minds are being opened, and then when minds are open, then there'll be lots of questions. But yeah, it's funny one. It's a funny one. It's just not something that lots of questions seem to come up about until people are in that situation. And then I suppose more the questions come from somebody who might get phoned up about a rabbit, and then they panic and go, oh my god, what am I going to do? I've got a rabbit. And then they might ring up and say, I've got a rabbit, what do I do? And then it's like, okay, then you have to start the thought process of how to treat a different species. So again, it's not really a specific question because people haven't necessarily been able to think about, this is what I need to ask, this is what I need to do. Those are the things that generate questions. And actually what happens is just panic. So yeah, an actual question is actually quite a hard thing to answer because there isn't any really.
Yeah. Just freeze mode. What do I do?
Yes.
Yeah, I know that feeling. We're also on a farm, and even like when we have a goat that has something funny, then I'm like, I don't know what that is. And I do. I just need to think about it. It's like that. Yes. Okay. Dogs have that as well, and other things. So yeah. So what do you really love about treating other species?
I love the thought process. That's my favorite about it. I love that you've got to think outside the box. It's different to what you normally do, and then you have to do lots of research. So obviously it depends on what you're treating. And so, for example, cats and rabbits, you get more of those. So now with them, I have to do less research because I know a lot more about them. So if I get that rabbit phone call, I can directly ask the questions to the owner that I need to, and I can think more easily about the case. I've already learned a lot of their anatomy, and all those sorts of things. I know their behaviors. When it comes to doing a more obscure species that I haven't necessarily treated before, then I have to start the whole research process off, learning about their behavior, their natural habitat, their natural movements, what is correct, therefore what is incorrect, all these other things. And that is fun for me. I love doing that process. I love going through YouTube and trying to find normal movements and all that sort of thing so that I can be able to be better at identifying what I need to identify. And I also really like learning from the keepers and the owners, and working as a team, because when you get to the more obscure patients, then you become more of a team in what you're doing. The vet's not necessarily handing over to you, right, off you go, you do that bit, I'll do this bit. You work with the vet, you make a plan together, and you work with the owner, you make a plan together, and it's all much more of a team effort, and I really like that. So there are differences.
Okay. So in terms of the knowledge that you have and the knowledge that you need to treat a new species, is there some stuff that you can extrapolate from horses and dogs, or are you doing most of it? Are you doing new research to kind of identify what you're looking at?
So there's loads that you can extrapolate from what we already know. So the fundamentals of physio don't change. We still know the tissue healing. Those things might change because of the animal type we're dealing with, or a great example is hibernation. So if you have hibernation, your metabolism slows down. It means tissue healing is going to slow down. So there's things like that make a difference to your basic underlying knowledge, but your basic underlying knowledge is still absolutely paramount and key. And from your underlying knowledge, that you're going to be working on your balance, strength training, flexibility, and proprioception. Those principles don't change. But what your research is how to deal with it in this animal rather than all my normals. And so we already do those adaptations. So for example, you don't treat a Dachshund the same as you treat a German Shepherd, so we do already make some differences to how we treat every breed difference. It's just a bit deeper when it comes to your species, because you've got so many different things, and obviously how you can treat them is going to vary. If, for instance, it's an animal you can't actually physically touch, then you're not going to be doing hands-on methods. You're going to be using visual methods. So you'll be watching how they move, their gait, how they lay down, watching for your joint angles through those normal motions. Are they, if they eat holding both hands, are they actually holding both hands in the same way, or is one arm sort of up like this because they can't actually bend at the shoulder correctly? And so you're just using other methods to gain the same information that you needed before. So there is, we've all got that underlying knowledge to build on. We just have to know our plan of attack of how we're going to build on it, if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes me think of last week's webinar with Kirsten Kirkby-Shaw, where she was chatting about some different species. She's done some work with zoos, and she had some very interesting cases that she shared. But the basis that she was working and teaching us from is there are 4 principles of physiotherapy and they don't change, or of rehabilitation and they don't change. And when you go to see a new patient, those things are constant and you work from that framework. And I really love that. It really helps you be like, okay, I need to identify the problems and set goals, and this is how tissues heal, and this is, these are the modalities that we can and can't use, and it's all that always stays the same. So that's very cool. The behavior changes, like if an owner calls you mentioned YouTube, right? So if someone calls you with an iguana, do you go, how does an iguana move on YouTube? Is that what you do?
I mean, you're probably not going to always find it so easily as that. I mean, that'd be lovely if you had those perfect titles available on YouTube. But my suggestion is, yes, you're basically trying to find examples of normal movement. So it might be that you have to watch a few David Attenboroughs, or something. There may well be people's pet iguanas that they've videoed. So yes, you're going to do that type of thing. And that's just because it's an easy source of potential information. You also have to realize that there's a lot of captive animals that are not necessarily moving perfectly. So you have to watch more than one source. You can't watch one and go, oh, that's how they move, if you've actually happened to have watched one that's also lame. So you have to do your research, and from more sources if possible. YouTube's a really useful source, so I do point people in that direction, just because there's lots of different videos and you can get hold of that. You see it quite well and quite quickly. But obviously, if you can also do some research papers, you read some research papers about how normal movement would be of a species, and things like that. And then, really start to observe it, critique it, see what you're seeing, comparing one from another, so that you can see differences. And then it will help build your sort of library of knowledge, because ultimately, even when we're treating our dogs, again, I come back to that for an example that's just easy to understand. We know that a bulldog does not walk the same as a German Shepherd, but you look at that bulldog, you just know whether it's right or wrong. You actually don't really question whether you know that or not. You just know because you're so used to it. And so it's kind of that same thing. It's just trying to get your confidence up as to what is normal movement. And I suppose actually, again, a more example that people could possibly relate to, for example, would be if you don't actually have rabbits, but you see a rabbit do a binky, you might have a heart attack because they go absolutely bonkers. And so seeing a binky for the first time would be like, uh-oh. And if they say, for instance, you treat them and they go mad afterwards, you might be absolutely horrified. You don't want them to do a binky after a treatment, obviously, because you do want them to chill out. But and for anyone who's listening, the binky is literally when they're just so excited and they jump all over the place. And yeah, YouTube it because it's very cute. But if you didn't know that was normal movement, then it would be a shock. So trying to see those types of things and find them out would be very helpful. It'll put your mind at rest.
I'm definitely going to go YouTube bunny binky when we're done here. So I haven't seen that, but that would be very cool. So I like that you've said now that we already make some adaptations. For example, the difference between treating a Dachshund and treating a German Shepherd, like we're going to arrange our environments a little bit differently, maybe sit in a different area, those kinds of things. And of course, like with the cat, we want to be in an enclosed room. So what are some of those things? Like, what are we going to do when we see a rabbit that is different in our setup and in our preparation to what we're used to?
So with a rabbit, again, it's always going to depend on your situation, what the rabbit's like, how well handled they are. You know, if they are a rabbit that's less used to being handled, then obviously we have to make further adaptations. If they are well used to being handled, as some house rabbits are, then they're much closer to our sort of more domestic situation. But, you know, you have to know things like, so for example, in the old days, because that's another thing, is information has moved forward hugely. In the old days, it used to be considered, oh, hold the rabbit upside down and then they chill out. Well, they do, but only seemingly. They, you know, their stress hormones are through the roof. So it's just that for rabbits, they freeze when they're scared. So, you know, you don't want to turn them upside down because you don't want that level of stress. In the veterinary world, it's considered that sometimes that is better than the alternative. So, I mean, you know, that's an argument to be had, you know, a different, you know, depending on the situation. But I don't turn any of mine upside down because I don't want those stress levels through the roof. So understanding those little things are really important. And also understanding that things like a rabbit will kick out if they're stressed or worried. And that, you know, rabbits' kicks are huge and they could break their own backs by doing it. They do that. And so that's scary. So you want to make sure that you're in control of your rabbit so that you know that if they do kick out, they are safe. So I might have a towel or position them so that their bum is right up against my leg. And then also from a safety point of view, it's also understanding what their method of attack is, you know. So with rabbits, they could scratch, they will kick, and they can bite. So understanding all those means that you can keep yourself safe as well. And then also it's also understanding what will help make them feel better, you know, what will help chill them out. I tend to always keep one hand on them and move very, very slowly. You know, I try not to put my body right over the top like a predator. You know, lots of those types of things will just help you create the better environment. Having the owner in is very helpful, and actually really helpful is having their bunny mate in. So because most rabbits, obviously, they're social. So if they have a bunny friend, which hopefully they do, but obviously, unfortunately, far too many are kept solitary. But if they have a bunny friend, bringing bunny friend as well and letting them hop around the room is very helpful. So yeah, there's stuff like that can be done.
That's cool. I want to know a bit more about the skunk. Like, how do you do that? Safely reduce, you know, prevent them from stressing? How do you handle it? Yeah, how did that work?
So again, it's very situation dependent. So you know, this particular skunk, how he came about was in normal practice. It wasn't in a typical zoo situation. This owner actually had all of his animals came from almost zoo rejects. That sounds terrible, doesn't it? But basically, when they don't get on with other of their own species they're supposed to be homed with, he took on those ones. So Stevie was supposed to be in a sort of normal zoo situation, but he never got on with his friends. So he ended up with this owner. So he ended up being a house skunk effectively. I mean, he just ended up being the coolest dude ever. He obviously had everything looked after correctly in terms of his husbandry and all that sort of thing. But he also went to the pub, and he was just the coolest skunk ever. And so although I had to be mindful of things like spraying and his potential aggression, he didn't have any of those things. He was really highly domesticated, which made life a lot easier. But again, information and research, times have changed. So back when I did him, which was a few years ago now, there was less information to go by. So, you know, I worked as a team with the vet and the owner of the skunk. I would never claim to know more than the owner of a skunk because that's what they do. They know everything. But we worked as a team together to sort the issue out. So the vet didn't actually really know what was going on with his lameness in his foreleg. And so he got referred, and we made a plan together so that we were all working to the best of our ability. And I set him a physio regime that basically took his exercise level right the way back down. And it worked. We got the lameness, it was gone, and we were absolutely thrilled. But it later came back again in another leg, and this raised other questions. We investigated vitamin D deficiency, which can cause lameness. All sorts of things were investigated, but obviously you don't have as much information about these species as you do about other species. And funnily enough, when I was doing the research about anatomy, there was more anatomy to be found about a raccoon, which is very similar, than there was about a skunk. So I had to sort of draw on that information to try and help me anatomically as well. But in the end, so we managed to get rid of the forelimb lameness, absolutely fine. And then it turned out that the vet decided he actually had bilateral cruciate rupture. And exactly. And the thing is, how skunks move, they will handstand, they will also stand up on their back legs. So there was obviously something bizarre going on, and the vet was obviously concerned about metabolic disease and stuff. But we were just sort of working through the program as we could. And actually, to be fair, I almost had a sigh of relief when there was cruciates, because I was like, oh, finally, we know what we're doing. And so I set the skunk up on, sort of much more normal rehab when it came to the cruciate repairs, because we knew the tissue healing and we knew what was going on, and it all made a lot more sense. And that was a lot easier. And so that was absolutely fine. And the skunk made an amazing recovery. But our actual difficulty was the hibernation period, because although he wasn't hibernating properly because he was living in the UK and in a normal home, he did slow down. So trying to do his exercises was really hard to get him motivated, because he was just like, look, I'm sleepy, I don't want to. So those became new challenges that we had to work with and be mindful of. So it was really interesting. But working with the owner meant that we could really make a plan that worked really well. And obviously, like I say, the vet was very much there. And like I say, we were an absolute team. And it was amazing. I can't tell you how much I loved my cuddles with Stevie. And he was the most loved skunk ever. And they actually even had a portrait commissioned of that skunk, and they gave me a copy, and it was the artist was the Queen's Corgis artist. So most loved skunk ever.
That is so amazing. So what are some of the kind of common mobility issues that rabbits, for example, would struggle with? So
common issues. So again, the sort of limiting factor when it comes to things like rabbits and cats to some degree is that finances. And so I want to say what's common, but actually I suspect I've got no clue, because the reality is that it's down to the owner whether or not they've got the money or choose to have the money to then go for physio. So I think that would probably be, if you did a research paper, I would be highly skewed with my response here. But there was a very interesting bit of research done on rabbits and owners, how much, I wish I could remember the number now, but a ridiculous number of owners think that the lifetime cost of a rabbit would be 500 quid, which is obscene, because it's actually closer to £9,000. So it's pretty shocking. So you don't see as many rabbits as we should be seeing, especially considering their lifespan is pretty much similar to that of many dogs. Crazy. But I have seen them for arthritis is pretty common, as it is in most species. That is definitely top on the list. Front legs being broken, particularly in lionhead rabbits, because they've got very low bone density. And lionheads are very popular breed, and they often live then in houses, and so they're tiny, and then the owner sort of steps back, in the kitchen or something, and they stand on that leg and it gets broken. So I have seen a lot of those, though I'd say in more recent years that has reduced, so hopefully through knowledge. But the front legs broken is pretty bad. I've had osteosarcoma in one that was sent to me for arthritis, but actually it turned out it was a massive lump. I was like, oh, I think that needs a bit of an investigation. And it went back and it was an osteosarcoma. So yeah, there's that. And then of course there is broken backs from them jumping, kicking out, and then yeah, they do break their backs. I had a rabbit paralysis that was obviously more of a precis because it did recover after about 6 weeks, and that was from a very strong jump, a kick, and then it had injured its back, but luckily it was amazing, and the rabbit walks and lives on, so I'm thrilled.
Cool. That's fantastic. I didn't actually know they could break their backs if they kicked strong enough. Artane says overweight in rabbits is also a really big problem. I would guess that obesity is quite common in any exotic or any other species that's being kept as a domestic animal, right?
Absolutely. And captive would be the word more than domestic even.
Okay.
You know, it is a really big problem in animals that are captive because they just don't get the exercise level that is required, and so, you know, it's a really sad fact. And yes, definitely the number of overweight rabbits is horrendous. Number of overweight cats is horrendous. Number of overweight anything is horrendous. And I was reading some more statistics only recently because they were published recently, but I'm terrible at retaining numbers, so they're not in my head. But you know, the number of owners that believed that their animal was the correct weight versus what they actually were was absolutely shocking. But I think that we're all probably in massive denial about body weight most of the time. But yeah, it's absolutely huge. All those things are.
I actually have to have a laugh here because Ali says if you look at their diets, you'd never think that they would be overweight. But I don't think that people feed them correctly, and that's the problem. Right?
There is that, but you know, although at the end of the day, we have to remember that food, no matter what source it is, even if you think, oh well, they're just eating grass all day, it does still contain calories, and so, you know, and to be given a balanced diet, they do then give them other things as well, and not necessarily the right things, because, you know, yeah, you're absolutely right. From a rabbit point of view, I mean, they need a lot of grass as their main source of energy, and actually, you know, what they would typically eat in the wild would not be a cucumber. You know, they would tend to be sort of more root vegetables, which are much high fiber, and, you know, roots and stuff like that. And so we don't get it right for most of them. And then ultimately you put them then in a box and expect them to be fine when they've got very little motivation. They're not going to go and find food. They're not, you know, doing all the normal humping and life things that they get on with that would
running from predators.
Exactly. And or equally, you even having the offspring themselves, you know, the mother would be feeding them, all those sorts of things that would really shave their weight off. You know, and then obviously there's, you know, wintering. I don't want to say that we make them too warm, because I would be that terrible parent that would be like, no, my baby's too cold, have every heater under the sun. But no, just move in, sleep in my bedroom, sleep in my bed. I would be terrible. But I think that there's a lot that we don't necessarily get right in terms of all these things to try and keep their weights correct, and certainly sticking anything in a box isn't ideal. You know, in terms of those types of things, we have to get them out, we have to exercise them. So and we have to recognize also that you can't just underfeed. You do need the right nutrition. So you can't just think, oh well, I'll just feed less because I'm keeping them in a box. It doesn't work like that. So yeah, it's complicated. It's really complicated.
Yeah. I love that you brought up the temperature, because we had a lecture on the equine platform about obesity, and the metabolism and temperature was a big thing that the lecturer spoke about, because we completely over warm them, and then they don't lose any weight over winter, and it's part of the problem, right? Ali, that's why I was laughing, because that's exactly what we say when we're on a diet and we're eating lettuce. Then it's like, stop eating like a rabbit. But it's funny. That was a good comment.
No, it's absolutely true. And and there'll be, I mean, if you think from a calorie point of view, like apples are ridiculously high, and loads of people give apple to rabbits, and it's like, actually isn't that natural. I mean, they might get the odd apple in the autumn or something, but then they go in winter and freeze their butts off and keep warm like that. So yeah, it is really interesting. And yeah, the rugging thing was really interesting, because I've also read a load of stuff about shaving them and all that sort of thing, because it's getting quite frowned upon now.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I think it was the Royal College did their newsletter, and they had a published paper saying that because people shave them and then rug them, but actually that just affects how they regulate their own temperature, and they can't then get it right for their legs and things. So really, we should just be leaving them naked and natural, and giving them the right shelters, and then that should be right. But they have to also get used to it, because if they've been brought up in a way they've been rugged and shaved and God knows what, then just sticking them out's not going to work.
Gonna work. No, definitely. So I'd love to also bring up the safety question, because I think that's often something that we're cautious about, especially if it's something big or something like a ferret or a meerkat. Then I'm going, I don't know if I want to touch you, because you're definitely going to bite me. So how do you how do you deal with the safety aspect? What do you need to know and do in different situations?
Safety is a really, really important question. Absolutely. And, let's put it into perspective. We have to do a safety risk assessment with every animal. It doesn't matter what they are. Horses can be incredibly dangerous. They can run you over, kick you, or bite you. I've been bitten on the head really badly by a horse once. I was just sweeping past the front of his stable. I was minding my own business. So, it really, you can't take anything lightly. Same with the dogs. We've all asked the owners, oh, do they bite? And then they're like, oh no, he's lovely, never do a thing. And then you see him, you're like, whoa, I do not trust you.
And he gives you those eyes, and you're like, yeah, no.
Exactly. So you have to do those risk assessments every day, and that is exactly the same when it comes to other species. It doesn't matter what they are, you have got to be careful. And obviously it just means different levels of careful. So if you're dealing with an animal that's a zoo animal, for instance, you're not going to be working with them on your own anyway. You're going to be in a team with the keeper, and then you need to find out from them what the safety precautions are. It might well be that you're dealing with an animal you cannot touch, and that's absolutely fine. And you equally want to be careful, like even if it's so like the gorilla situation that Kirsten brought up was a really good point. So he was putting his hand out, but he could easily have grabbed your hand back. So you don't want to be in that situation. So, lots of animals are trained to put their various bodies bits in different positions so that you can do assessments or, whatever is needed. They're trained from a veterinary point of view, and you use that to your advantage. But you must be safe, and you must learn what their methods of attack are. So, and it, even from a herbivore point of view, okay, he's not going to eat me, but what is he going to do that could be dangerous to me? So for an example, an alpaca or a llama, they might spit at you. They're going to aim at your eyes. And you don't want to get all that crud in your eyes. It's going to be pretty horrible. 9 times out of 10, they're going to miss because they're not particularly clever at it. And it kind of goes everywhere as a big spray. It's not really the end of the world. But you have to make that risk assessment. Do you want to wear goggles? You may well not. Speak to the keeper, because most of the time they won't. But if you're not dealing with the directly head end, it might be okay, but those animals are still going to be able to kick you. So those are all your big animals. You have got to be really careful, and you mustn't be touching things that you shouldn't touch. That would just be silly and foolish. And as I say, you have to speak with your keeper and learn from them what their risk assessments are as well. They've already done them. you know, it's unlikely you're going to be left to go in a tiger pen with a tiger. It's not going to happen, is it? But you know, but you have to be able to be in control of your situation. And I'm just sort of thinking globally, I suppose there are situations where they have animals sedated, so you can have photos, and that's terrible, isn't it? But you know, I wouldn't trust a sedation, never in a million years, not unless it was done properly by a vet and for medical reasons, because then I know it's done right, and that's all part of the process. So yeah, it always take responsibility for yourself and do your risk assessments. And then when it comes to your smallies, absolutely right, meerkats bite, and they are not funny. So again, you've got to work with your animal, with your keeper, work out what's right and what's wrong. And you can't, like I say, you can't think, even for your domestic species, that they get handled all the time. Oh, well, then it's going to be absolutely fine. Any animal can have a bad day, and you know, if they're in pain, you pull them the wrong way, then it's going to go wrong, you know. So you've got to be sensible about them all. And cats are probably one of the most varying in terms of behavior that you've ever seen, because you've got the most amazing complicit lap cat you've ever seen that will do absolutely anything for you, to the biggest feral that will just be stuck to the top of your ceiling if it can, and you just have to peel it off and hope for the best. So yeah, it's not simple, but definitely stay safe.
Okay, so it's just about relying again on the knowledge of the owner or the keeper, because they know that animal the best, and then being careful and sensible. I think that, you know, the point you raise is fantastic. Like, horses are very dangerous, but because I work with them, I know them, right? I know their behaviors and their signs. And the same thing with dogs. Like, we can recognize from a dog's like eyes how it's looking at you, more or less where its tolerance is going to be. So it's easier to try and stay within that animal's tolerance, because you're being sensitive to their signs all the time. But with a species we're not familiar with, we don't necessarily know those signals and those signs. We don't know what they're going to do, how they're going to show us that they're uncomfortable. And I think that's the one that makes me kind of stand back and go, I'm not so sure, because I don't know how to read that animal, right?
Totally. And that's why I said it's really important to do your research, because then you go armed with the knowledge of, I'm not saying you're going to be completely as good as you are with dealing with dogs and horses, because you absolutely know them, because you dealt with them every day. And that's why it means you have got to rely on the keeper and the owner to give you extra knowledge. But that's what I'm saying, you've got to work within your comfort zone. So even if an owner said, oh yeah, you'll be all right in that enclosure, if you are not 100% sure that you will be, because that animal you know to be a relatively a safe, you know, species that actually isn't going to do any damage, God, I can't even think of one off the top of my head now, but you know, if you think there's any risk, you don't take it. Do you see what I mean? You don't, you know, like we wouldn't with our dogs. I mean, you know, you don't listen to the owner. Oh, he's a good boy, so therefore, oh, it's fine. You know, you always have that knowledge in the back of your head that this could go wrong at any time. And so, you know, exactly the same with these. You've done your research. You know what their methods are that they might get you, and you can see how big they are, how strong they are, you know, what damage could be done if they are able to do their own thing, and you take that on board. So it's not a case of relying on your research 100%, because you're never gonna, unless you're dealing with these animals every day like the keeper does, you won't know those little triggers. And even the keepers will come a cropper every now and then. I mean, they're amazing with what they do, they absolutely are, but they deal with them every day. So like I say, you know, rely on them, and you've got to think what your end goal is when you're dealing with these. There's no need to put yourself in a position of danger, because if the end goal is something you can achieve in a hands-off method, by which actually will be a case of sort of the bigger animals for sure. I mean, you can't lift a really heavy thing, can you? So if a hands-off method is sufficient, then that's absolutely fine. And so there's no need to put yourself in a dangerous position, because you haven't got to get out the goniometer and check a knee just because you can. You know, if you can see that movement is right or wrong prepared to the other side while doing your judgment from a distance, then you can set up an exercise plan. It might be pole work, for instance. I've seen pole work done with tigers really effectively too. If that works, then that's fine, and you've done it really safely without touching them. Fabulous.
I love it. Fantastic. Just get creative and
Yes.
Don't take chances. Yeah.
No.
So how do we gain confidence and experience working with other species?
That's the toughest nut to crack. Confidence and experience is only going to come from putting yourself out there. So the best way is going to be to volunteer at, zoos or wildlife parks, farms, anything you can, to, agricultural college. You can gain your experience from anywhere. What you have to recognize as well, though, is that you don't know what animals you're going to get called for. So you could gain a load of experience in sheep and never get a sheep call. So, the more variety, the better. But obviously, the more time you spend with one species, the more you're going to get really good with that one species. But yeah, volunteering is going to be the absolute key to getting your experience. And I mean, certainly, like I say, my lifetime's come out of it. I mean, I grew up on a farm my uncle had a farm, but it, can't pay for that, just it's one of those things that just happens. And so, obviously you have to try and work it around your work or whatever, and make it work, because obviously it is difficult if you're volunteering because you're not paid for that. So that is tough. And then, your other research can come from, our internet is an amazing resource. You can find loads of information, PubMed, all sorts of things. There are amazing places to gain information to help you achieve what you need to. But you just have to remember, you are not going to know it all alone. It's never going to be one person that knows everything when it comes to these species. And, working as a team with your vet and with your keeper is absolutely imperative. And things like rabbits and cats, much easier to gain experience with, because we can get hold of those through your vets. You can volunteer a few days at the vets, and that will be an amazing experience no matter what. But there are also rabbit rescue centres and cat rescues and all sorts of things, and they desperately want volunteers. So yeah, I think that's probably the best answer.
Put yourself out there and do some volunteer work.
Thank you.
And just thank you for sharing your knowledge.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be able to. I want all animals treated. It'll be lovely.
Yes, agreed. They should. What did you say earlier? If they have muscles and bones, send them my way. Yeah,
exactly. Muscles and bones, they should be treated. Absolutely.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit the subscribe button so you get notified every time I load a new podcast. And please, if you get a moment, head over to Stitcher or iTunes and leave me a review. It's a really lonely job being a podcaster, and so the only time I get to hear from you or know that you're out there is when I get a review. And know that I read every single one of your reviews. So to those of you that have left reviews, I want to say a very, very big thank you. Every time we get a review, it really helps to get the Veterinary Rehabilitation Podcast out there to all the vet rehabbers all over the world. All right, vet rehabbers, so if you are looking for more continuing education in the field of veterinary rehabilitation, head over to onlinepethealth.com. Go be awesome, guys.